Hi, in this video we will see how the Reactjs components works and the different kinds of Reactjs components like functional component, class components, and their building structures. So let's see what is the components in Reactjs. So basically the component, the word component, you will be familiar with this one if you already work in Node.js, but if you don't, it's also still okay. So component is something if you already use also JavaScript, so you know that function and class, two things in JavaScript. So if you make a different kinds of function or class which can do some specific features, that could be a components, but the main concept of component is using in React.js and some other libraries like AngularJS. So this concept you need to be understand, like okay, why it's saying components and what is exactly the components. Is it something, some new kind of code or something? No, it's actually simply the component is a JavaScript function or class. So that means you may have a simple function like hello. So it's a simple function. You see the function is JavaScript function. It could be arrow function, I write a normal function, or it could be JavaScript class. So you know that in JavaScript class we have something will extend the class, like here we see hello class, hello extend from something. But for React.js, when you make this component as a class component, that should be, this something should be React component. React has some library files, so you will say okay, react.components or components, and then they will extend it. We will see the structure. But for functional component, this is very simple, like a function. So basically you can think, okay, I have a function in React.js, every function I create, it could be a component, but not everything is a component, because some part is just a function, not a component. So for component there are some rules, some standard you need to follow, and some protocols also. So let's see this one, return user interface. So every component has a return statement, because you see here I create function hello and then class hello. They are different structure, but both of them must return something. And what they are going to return, they are actually going to return some user interface or HTML elements, and normally we call them React elements, JSX syntax. And they actually, so basically he is returning a JSX syntax. The JSX syntax is something like you can return some HTML with some JavaScript, so it's like a mixing. This is very basic of JSX. We'll see some example of what exactly how returning from the components, and why we call this user interface UI, because every time you return something, it will be actually like a block of HTML elements or user interface you will see for the front-end user or the client. Okay, so also in the components, most of the components, it can receive input from user or another components. It's also possible, like you have a function, and the function, we know that every function can receive some parameter. It's also possible in this case, so he can receive some parameters, and then he can also sometimes send some parameters. This is like a normal functionality, but for React component it will work in different way. And of course the code is reusable, and that's why it's very powerful, because whatever you use in React.js like function or class components, every component could be useful. So you make something like a simple example, you make maybe a small calculator, and this is a component, calculator component, and you can actually put it into any other function or any other website, or maybe you make a header of any website. This is a component, and header actually contain everything that needed for one website. You can actually use this code for another website, just change the content. Okay, two types of components we already talked at the beginning, functional component and class component. So functional component and class component, these two components are more famous. Now functional component becoming more famous because of simplicity. Class component a little bit complex, but class component has also a lot of nice feature that you can use. Okay, and then there is a simple example I can show you, like how exactly a functional component look like. So you see export default function hello. So I write here export default before function. This is a word how you actually export. After you create a component, you can export it, so everybody can import it. That means you export it and someone can actually call it and use it. And this is the default way you can actually export like this way. There is also many components in one file you can also export. We will see this. And also it's recommended to write the component name, like here hello is the name, it should be capital letter. You can write small letter, it will also work, but capital letter is recommended. And this is because, so if you write a component, it will be different than HTML elements. Like example, you write a component called h1 or p, like paragraph in HTML. So if you write it and a small letter, capital letter, then it will be different than HTML. And every you see here, for every components, like every functional component, there is no state, so it's a stateless. We'll talk about state. What is state? Normally you can think of some kind of data. We don't have some state data, so like any data for this function. So by default he does not have anything like this. And when he return the HTML elements, he can return like simply like return and then elements. So he wrap up hello inside h1, something like this, and then he return it back. But for class components, the everything is same. Then you write the class hello, so here's the function name, and then you extend it from react.component. So as I said, there was something like a small example, but now looks the real example. So you see react.components, and this is coming from React class or the library, and then you can actually have a component inside React, and then you can make a new component extending Reactjs. And you see this is stateful. That means there is specific, by default they must need some data, or they can have some state. And state is something very famous topics we'll talk in another that's our next video. So you see by default every component, class component, has a constructor which can hold state data. So we already know this structure from JavaScript, always has a by default constructor. Inside constructor we will put the data for the own component, and then render method. So you see functional component has return only, they don't have anything called render function or something, but class component they have render here, you can see it. So render is a process is a method. So this method will actually wrap up everything and return the hello in h1. So in class component we need to write more thing than functional component. You can see here the differences, like by default class component has constructor, this one, but functional component does not have it and they don't need it. But class component need it when you have data or state. And by default class component has render process, but functional component only have return. So inside render they have return in class component like this, but functional component does not have something like this. So this is the some differences you will see when you will see the real examples. And look now the structure of components. So we'll create some component file, and then we will see this. So you can see here, like if there is a structure like this, a website structure, you have a header, navigation menu, content, and then main content, and then another content. It could be left content, right content, and a footer. So every part of a website is a component, and you can create them separately. And then we can see how it will look like when we actually use this inside a website. So for header, everything in a React.js website, when you install by create React apps, you will first have a file called app.js, which is app components. And then inside app.js, if you create this structure, if you want to create header, then you need to create a header.js file, JavaScript file. This is just a naming, you can write any name, and this file will contain the header information. So it will be under app.js like this, and navigation menu will be also something similar like the next components. Every component will hold by app.js, because app.js is holding the whole website, right? So and then it would be content will be like this, next one, and the main.js will be like this. So every file is like a component, separate components, content. Then you have footer.js. So by this way you can actually have the whole structure of all components. And look at this one, all components are connected or put inside app.js. they are not one inside another one, they are like separate. But somehow if in the main component you put maybe content, then it will be under this one. But in this case app.js is the parent or father of all these components. So that is the basic structure. Now let's see the code. So in the coding part you will see more details. What we just write here, we will see this in our coding part. Okay, let's see the coding part. I already have installed create React apps here, so you can see in the create React apps I already have all the structure to create a React.js apps, and what I have here, I have just a line what is components, and you can see this on the screen, nothing more. And let's create our own components. But before creating our own component, you can see here already after you install React.js using create React apps, you can see a function which is a functional component, and you see a return statement as we talked before. So you can see there we have app, and app is also capital letter, and a return statement which is returning this interface, so the div, and you can see this interface in this whole screen. Let's reduce the interface, some part of the interface, like this logo is not necessary anymore, this is from the React.js logo, so I'll remove this one, and I'm using this inside the div component, so let's remove it also. Then what we have, what is React.js and what is component. So we actually not going to make what is React.js, we are going to just use this one, what is components in React.js. So let's reduce the sum of them. So you can just start it from the beginning with a scratch, you don't have anything, and you'll see the screen something like previously, and in this screen you should see this message, what is component. So if you can do this, let's create a components. So basically what you see here is coming from app.js. Let's see the structure in React.js. After you install React.js, we have readme file.md file, which is information about React.js and how to start React.js, and more information about this, all the libraries. And then there is a packet.json file with a dependency. You can see different dependencies in React.js. So by default, React, when you install React, they have React, React DOM, React script, web vital, these all files installed already. And then also they have package-log.json file, which is something not so important, because by default when you have packet.json, you install something for node modules or any library, packet.log file will be increased. It actually keep the information of your computer and the internet and also the libraries you're installing. Then you have gitignore file. So gitignore file is necessary when you actually wanted to ignore node modules or maybe some extra file not uploaded in the GitHub library or GitLab. So you can use gitignore in this case. Now I have a source folder. So source folder is important. After you install a React.js apps, the source folder is the most important one. You can go to source folder and then go app.js. So I already open app.js. Let's close it. So if I open app.js, app.js is the main file which will actually load React.js for you. But how app.js is calling? App.js is actually calling from one file called index.js, and index.js is the initial file of React.js. You see here we have React DOM.render, and that one is actually wrapping up everything and then calling app component. So this is the component app, and this app component is actually the app.js file. That means every component in React.js is a file which is exported, and then you can actually import some function from the file. So in this case we are exporting function app, like this one, this line 13, export default app, and then other file is using this, that's why it's a component. So that is the basic things they have. Now let's create our first component ourselves. So as we see a few minutes ago, like the structure we see a few minutes ago is header, footer and other parts. So let's, for this website, so for this website or for this one, if you need a header at the tops and how it will look like. So from that structure, if you create this, there is a two way you can do this one. Let's see the first way. So I will create the component inside the same file. So I will use the functional components. So as we know that functional component means you have a function and then you have something like a name of the function. So we say okay, header, and then we write something like this, curly bracket, complete the function, and then I will return just a simple message. I will say maybe h1. So I say maybe header data. So you can write later some header like h1, some anchors, some links, some top menu, but for now let's look at this one. So this is one component. This component is complete. You can use this function. Now it's a function, but you can use this function like a components. How? You have to just call it inside this line. Maybe before this one, if I say okay, my header should be here, so I write down header, I write it capital letter, so it should be capital like this, and complete the header. And what will happen, this when you write it capital letter, so it's, you see this is like a tag, so you write a tag sign, angle bracket, and finish the tag. Every time in Reactjs, every tag should be finished if it's a single tag. So in this case I create this tag, and then if you go down we have header function. So header is complete. Now you should see this message header data before what is component before this one. So let's go to the browser, and we already see this data. So this is one part is happened. Now you can actually create many function like this. So if you have another one, another component which is called maybe the content header, or you say okay, navigation menu, then you can write return h, let's write h3 for this one, and we say navigation menus here. So now the same way you can just use the name. So after you create it, it will be useful inside this one. So if we say okay, navigation menu is after maybe header, then you will have something like this, navigation menu header data. So everything you see they are like separated part of the code like component. What we write here, we just write a function and just return something, nothing more. But now look at the, when you inspect it, how it looks like. So if I inspect and I want to see the header, and if I go to here this one and look at the code, so everything is inside the div called root. This is coming from index.js, and then you have a head h1, that is our part. h1 is inside header class, and then h3 navigation menu is inside header also after h1, and then h1. So you see all the h1 is actually they take this line only h1 and h3 from this one, then they actually compile and create it inside here. So they replace it. So everything will be compiled, and you will see like HTML elements. So in the inspect you will not see any Reactjs or anything. But if you install React developer tools, then you can actually see all the component how it looks like. So if you click here, you see I have a app, and inside the app I have another component called header, then I have navigation menu. So different component structure they are showing me, the component tree. But for this you need to install React developer tools. You can actually just search it, React developer tools for Chrome or Safari, you can find it. And so this is like two ways we created. So every component, header, navigation menu, content, everything will be look like this. But in this case I create this inside the same file app.js, but which is not mandatory. You can actually create them separately. So how you will create them separately? If you click here, and let's create a component file name header, so we'll give the same name. You can give different name, but if you have just simple file, you can write okay header.js as the example we are showing. Inside header.js you just need to write or cut it like this, and then put it back here. So I just separate the function, nothing else. But after I separate the function, if I want to use it, I need to export it exactly like that way. So you can export. So you see we have export default app. You can export it after create the function. You can write it here, export default header like this. This is one way. The second way would be you can write it exactly the same time when you create the function on the top. So you can write export default like this. So then it will be also exported. So I created header.js, but now after I export it, I am already using that function before in the same file. Now I am separated the file, so header is here, and I need to import it before I use it, otherwise they will not recognize where is the file. So you can actually do it two ways. You can write here import statement like this, import, and what we are going to import, we are going to import header, which is coming from, so it's a built-in component that you created, so you have to write dot slash, and then you will write header. So they will understand, okay, from the header it's coming, the file name is header, and this is coming from this file. So we should actually see the results. Yeah, you see it's working, there is no error or nothing because it's coming from that one. But if you forget to import it, then there should be some kind of error. We can see the error also for understanding. So you see that header is not defined. Okay, so then you should actually fix it. Okay, now you are using it, so header is like this. The navigation menu you can also separate the same way, but I will not separate so you can understand it. But look at this one, I created in a functional component. How it will look like if it's not a functional component, the header, if it's a class component, how it will look like. For the class component, the difference between function component and the class component now you can see. So this is a function component, just a simple function, and it's returning something, export default. So export default part would be same if I make it a functional component. So I will maybe comment this one, so you can see the difference between them. So for commenting, you can always select the part of the code and then press Ctrl K C if you have keyboard like this settings, and then let's see how we will make a class component. So the first one what I write here was functional components example. Now the same component we will create for class component. So for class components example, so we see export default function header, I will write the same name. This is a functional component what we write, but for class component that should be totally different. Export default class, name is header of the function, and it should be extend from React. So this file does not know where is React, you need to import it if you want to use it. So we need one more line here, we need to write a import statement, and in the import statement something is coming from React. You can write here component. So React has one file inside which is called component, and React is a library already installed. So if you write it, and then they are making a component for Reactjs using extending the header from React component. Okay, and then rest of the part is same. So first part is like this, we compile it, and then the return part. So we need to return something. By default every class component has something called constructor. This is by default they have it, but if you don't have any data, then you don't have to write it. So in this case it's not necessary because we have no data, right? So no data means no state data, you can say no data for now. So there is no data, that's why you don't need to write it. But if you have data, then you need constructor and use it. If you have a state or profs data, then you have to use it. So in this case component does not need constructor. This is I commented, you don't need to write it. Now let's see how we write the line number 3, like how to return header data, just this message for class component. Every class component, if you write here return, it will not work because class component must render something. So render is a method, inside render method they can actually return something for you. So then you can return something same way how you actually return it here. So you can return it, Ctrl C, and then you put it here. So now you can return it. And the benefit of this way is also there is some benefit, like before return you can actually also write some JavaScript here. So there you can write some JS code, JavaScript code, it's possible, but like here for the function component you have to write before the return statement or something is also possible. So there you can write some JavaScript, or outside of the render process you can also write some JavaScript. So two places you can write, but here is just one place. So this is like for simple understanding. Now look at the return header data. So in the header data we have some files like this, header data, and then in this header data now I will see in the return statement I will see these messages. So if I go down and go to in my browser, I see okay, header data is still, and now it's coming for class component. So I don't have to do anything after I just make the structure of functional component and the class components. Here everything looks same, there is no differences. So I can see this one. So all the components you can create like this way. We will see the all components like content, footer and everything, and we will make a small part of a small layout based on this one. So you see the differences again. So here we have class component which is extending from React components, React file, you need to import React component, and then the render process you needed. There is no data. If you have some data in a state or the class component, they should be inside the constructor like this. Okay, so it's not there. We'll see this also, like how the data is coming and what will happen.